Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whenever the fuck you're watching this. This is the RosinBaggers podcast, brought to you by Backyard Sports. Ty, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. Much better now that I've seen the Cardinals score. Last night was a rough outing for the St. Louis Cardinals as they got absolutely drubbed in Denver by the Colorado Rockies. This coming, of course, after a very emotional weekend in St. Louis, a three-game sweep of the New York Yankees. First time in the history of baseball that the St. Louis Cardinals have swept the New York Yankees. They turn around, they get slaughtered by Colorado, and now St. Louis is doing the dirty on the Rockies. It's in the top of the first inning with one out. The bases are loaded, and it's already 4-0 Cardinals on top. So let's go St. Louis. Got a lot to talk about, of course. A huge weekend in terms of baseball action. Gave us a lot of great series to highlight and a lot of great series to go over. So excited to dive in.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that's how you bounce back, right? You get skunked a little bit, and you come back and you drop a curly number on them in the first inning. So St. Louis is making a statement here. Yeah, I'm with you. I think we just jump right in here and talk about the series we looked at last week. We previewed them a little bit. We were pretty quick because we were talking about post-trade deadline and whatnot, but I'm really curious to hear your thoughts here. Padres, Dodgers, obviously coming out of the trade deadline. I think we all looked at this and said, this is what San Diego traded for, right? The matchup with the Dodgers, potentially the matchup with the Mets, maybe the Braves. They're looking at those other top teams in the NL and saying, we've got to win the arms race. Didn't seem to go that way, though. What are your thoughts on this series?
It did not go that way at all for San Diego, and in fact, quite the opposite. And I think they left Chavez Ravine with a little egg on their face. Here was a team that was certainly highly confident after the trade deadline deals. You mentioned them. They beat LA in a race to get Juan Soto. Of course, the move to get Hader over there as well. San Diego had all trajectory pointing their way. And it was a series that I certainly highlighted as one that I wanted to watch because I wanted to see if San Diego would be competitive against the Los Angeles Dodgers, not only here in the regular season, but a matchup that certainly had postseason implications as well. And like you mentioned, the Dodgers they flexed a little bit. They flexed their muscles and showed why they're still the Dodgers and why they're still likely the favorites in the National League to win that National League pennant and make a World Series appearance. Tony G continues to impress from the National League perspective, certainly in that conversation for NL Cy Young, but he's going to be dealing with another man that is pitching pretty well right now in Miami, and Alcantara, as he's had another glorious outing. I think he has thrown 5 scoreless so far in Miami's matchup, but Tony G pitched 5 scoreless. The Dodgers threw a 4-hitter. They knocked off San Diego 8-1, and that was Friday night's opening night, and it was Vince Scully appreciation night. There was a big tribute to him beforehand. I think that emotionally charged the crowd. They were into it, and it had all of the feeling of a playoff atmosphere in the pregame. But once we settled in, it was like, this is still the Los Angeles Dodgers, and this is a San Diego team with still a lot of wood to chop, so to speak, here in the regular season. So the Dodgers knock off San Diego 8-1, and you wonder, okay, well, what's going to happen on Saturday? And as we continue into the weekend and get some decent pitching matchups Saturday, Will Smith homers, drives in 3 runs. The Dodgers continue to pull away to the tune of an 8-3 victory, very similar to Friday night's action. Sunday, it was all about the pitching for the Dodgers once again as they shut out the Padres. Cody Bellinger comes back to the lineup in a big way. He's a streaky player, and when he's hot, he can go lava.
His good is nuclear.
Yes. Ooh. And Bellinger did that Sunday. Went off for 2 home runs. Dodgers shut out the Padres 4-0. They complete the 3-game sweep. They win again to start off the new week. They've now won 9 straight, and get this, 15.5 out in front of a San Diego team, that a lot of baseball pundits and a lot of baseball experts are still throwing in the top 10 in their Major League Baseball power rankings. You know, for me, this series it raises 2 questions. One, can anybody in the National League stop the Dodgers? Because San Diego had loaded up, and they had essentially pointed the crosshairs right at LA and went into LA's backyard and left with their tail tucked between their legs. Can anybody stop LA? And the other question this raises for me is San Diego everything that they're being made out to be? Because right now they really haven't proved it. They were on the big stage in the prime time with the spotlight, all the eyeballs. Baseball fans everywhere had their popcorn out for this series because, again, in terms of playoff implications and closing that gap in the National League West race, it didn't have a whole lot of gusto behind it. But in terms of being competitive and playing competitive baseball, they didn't. 8-1, 8-3, 4-0. They weren't close in this series. And there's the biggest takeaway is there is still a huge gap, not only in the National League West, but maybe in the entire National League between first best, which is LA, and the next, which at this point might be St. Louis or the Mets.
For sure. And a couple of things I kind of want to piggyback off there, because you look at the Padres, they, make that big trade. Sometimes you can get a little spellbound by that, right? And I'm hoping, at least for competitive, competition's sake, right? Having another team that can compete in the NL. I hope that that's what it is, and they kind of break out of this funk of like, hey, we won the trade deadline, now we can just coast. Like, sometimes you can get spellbound by those things. You look at the Dodgers, and oh, by the way, Walker Buehler's hurt. Dustin May is hurt, and Clayton Kershaw right now is hurt. So you're looking at a team that has won 9 straight. They're like 15-3 or something in their last 18, 15-2 in their last 17, and they've outscored their opponents by double since June 23rd. And they're just missing a Cy Young candidate to start the season, one of the best pitchers of his generation, and another guy who looks like he's a guy that, on the rise, about to explode on the scene in Dustin May.
Yeah.
That team is just loaded for bear, and they have the Padres number. They outscored them like you mentioned, the big scores, but it's been the whole season. Going into that series, they'd outscored them like 45-13. It's unbelievable what the Dodgers are doing. And they haven't gotten a lot of contribution from some big bats in the lineup as well. Like you mentioned, Cody Bellinger, who can get white hot at any time, has not been a good hitter for 2.5 years now, except the playoffs. He seems to come alive in the playoffs for whatever reason. He's a primetime performer. But that Dodgers team is scary if you look at it from what they're going to get back here in the next anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 to 8 weeks. They're looking at Buehler should be back, in the next handful of weeks. They're projecting for him to get back. So that's a team that's just going to get better. And if you're the Padres looking up right now after that series, I know Manny Machado said, I'm not worried about it because I'm Manny fucking Machado. But
right.
Like, when are you guys going to become the San Diego fucking Padres and start winning games against the Dodgers here? And it is frustrating that, if you're a Padres fan, frustrating that you're still under the thumb of Big Brother in the NL West here.
Well, and mentioned some of the injuries and some of the bats. I don't think LA has reached their full potential with the offensive lineup yet. No. I don't think Mookie Betts has reached his full potential of what he's capable of. Freddie Freeman certainly is capable of providing a lot more spark. Clayton Kershaw, oh, by the way, is also on the injured list and is not back in that starting rotation. So they're getting production from everybody, and their stars are either hurt or underperforming to Dodger standards. I mean, still playing some pretty damn good baseball, but underperforming to Dodger standards. This is a team that is only going to get better and hit their stride as we move on in closer to the postseason. And right now, for San Diego's sake, you put this lineup together, you're only 1 game up on the National League wild card. Danger, Will Robinson, because Milwaukee's right behind it. Milwaukee is now all of a sudden playing playoff baseball again after their tailspin. They've had to kick it back into gear. So San Diego's in danger of not only missing out on this NL West race, but in missing out on the entire postseason. And wouldn't that be a story in and of itself? The team that absolutely loaded up at the trade deadline can't get to a playoff push and can't even get to the postseason. It's not out of the realm of possibility. As we move along towards the season, again, Tatis is going to be a huge addition to that lineup when it happens, but it's going to take him time to get back into full stride. I don't think Fernando Tatis getting back into the San Diego lineup is going to make that much of an immediate impact because he's going to have to get his MLB feedback. He's going to have to get the reps, and the rest of the division, the rest of the National League has been playing at fourth gear since May. And so, I think there's a lot of people that will say, well, Fernando Tatis is just going to come back into the lineup and it's all going to be fine. And we can breathe.
You damn sure hope so if you're a Padres fan.
Right. I don't see
But that isn't usually how it works.
No. And so, San Diego, not only in danger of missing out on the entire postseason, but certainly, and you mentioned it perfectly, talking about the big brother theory, they had the opportunity to go in there. They wanted to show who's boss, and LA just flexed a little bit and slapped him back a little bit. So it was a really intriguing series, and it certainly was not one that I expected. I will say that I bet all in on black if it's the roulette table. I mean, I tried to cash in on the hype with San Diego, and I got excited about it, and it just left a lot more questions than answers in San Diego.
Yeah, one closing thought on San Diego, too, and I know this flew under the radar for most people. It flew under the radar a bit for me, but Brandon Drury has been playing really, really good baseball since he came over to San Diego, and he was a fine player before they got him at the trade deadline, but that's a sneaky pickup that if Tatis comes back and plays well, if Josh Bell continues to put up a 900 OPS, and if Juan Soto starts to get hot with the bat, he's a guy that can bat 350 down the stretch and get his batting average close to 300 by the end of the season. If all those pieces fall in place, Brandon Drury is just yet another complementary piece within that lineup that makes them long and hard to pitch to within that lineup. But it doesn't look good right now coming out of this trade deadline. I think I have the confidence that they'll figure it out. They've got a pretty savvy veteran locker room. We talked about how Soto's, feels like he's been in the league forever, but he's only 24. But you got to kind of consider him a veteran. He's been around since he was 18 years old, batting against Major League pitching. So I think that they'll find a way to figure it out, but it doesn't look good right now. Like you said, danger, Will Robinson, danger for sure.
There's a lot of hypotheticals going on with San Diego. There's a lot of ifs. And I think with confidence, we can say with LA and teams like New York, and maybe even throw Atlanta in there and say win. There's a lot of ifs in San Diego. And so, like I said, more questions than answers for sure.
Yeah, we're going to talk about an if later with the Dodgers, but it's a very, very different if than what we're talking about with San Diego. All right, let's look at my series here, and very similar, right? In the Mets, the Braves, I hyped this up a little bit. The Braves have been playing really hot baseball. I was worried that the Mets didn't do anything at the trade deadline to get themselves better. I was worried that Jacob deGrom may never pitch, right? Depending on how he felt, you had to start thinking, like, it's August, right? Are we going to see deGrom? Well, he goes, makes a couple rehab starts, feels good, comes out, and he's throwing 101, and it looks like he's trying to throw 65. It's just unbelievable how effortless it is with him. He comes out, he shuts the Braves down. Max Scherzer had a great game against the Braves, and you start to think, like, are these Mets for real? Because I think we've all sort of been pumping the brakes a little bit with the Mets because of how many times we've seen them do this through April, May, June, and July. And then August hits, and it seems like the Mets just forget how to play baseball. It doesn't look that way right now because they took 4 of 5 against the Braves here and made a statement because it was 3.5 games going into that series. And you had to feel like if you're the Braves, even just getting 3 out of 5 there, you cut it to 2.5, you win the series, and you start to push in the stretch run. But, man, losing 4 out of 5 and falling to 6.5, it starts to feel like an insurmountable mountain to climb at some point. Now, we still have 2 months of baseball left. I get it. Almost 2 full months. I get it. But you have to look at that and say, man, that fucking 1-2 punch of Scherzer and deGrom, that's scary. Very, very scary. And we talked about it at the very beginning of the season and in our season preview about what that was going to mean. I mean, you picked deGrom as a Cy Young candidate and Stove picked Scherzer as a Cy Young winner. So, like, right there tells you just how much we thought of that pitching staff coming into this season with that 1-2 punch. And they've been getting a good production out of Carrasco, good production out of Taijuan Walker, and Bassett's been pretty good as well throughout the season. He's been pretty steady. So they don't seem to have a kink in the armor. When you look at it and you start to think about what the Mets did against the Braves, they put the ball in play a lot. They put a lot of pressure on the defense. They moved move runners around the diamond a lot. I got a buddy I was talking to quite a bit who's a big Braves fan. He said, like, I just can't understand how the Mets are fucking winning. They just put the ball in play and it finds grass. Isn't that what baseball is, though? Yeah. Right? Like, the baseball that we grew up on was put the ball in play, see what happens, right? You get a good fat pitch to hit, drive the ball out of the outfield, drive it out of the stadium. But for the most part, you put the ball in play, put pressure on the defense, and good things can happen. And that's what the Mets do on the offensive side of the ball. And they've got some boppers in that lineup. Alonso's a big, big bopper. But you just see them kind of put the ball in play, run the bases, play good defense, pitch the ball really well. It's starting to feel like, and I hate to say this because I know my dad's watching, big Braves fan, but it's starting to feel like this Mets team is for real, and they're going to be a problem that people are going to have to deal with in October.
History is the famous quote that is doomed to repeat itself, and I think that is what so many of us have felt with New York, because we've seen this movie before. We've seen the sequel. We've seen the third installment. It's like a bad Jurassic Park film. They all end the same. Somebody gets eaten by a Tyrannosaurus Rex at the end, and typically that's when New York just can't have the wheels to outrun their opponents towards the end of the season. So you're expecting the New York Mets to fall out at some point down the road. You mentioned the Jacob deGrom thing, and here's where I'm going to say kudos to not only the New York management, but the entire staff that had deGrom's watch and was on his rehab assignment, because they did not rush him back. Also, kudos to the Mets for being up in front, so there was no need to rush Jacob deGrom back. But I felt like
it's easier to leave him rehabbing when you're up 5-6 games.
Absolutely, but I felt they did it right with him, and I think it should be a sign to the rest of the league on how to treat some of these pitchers and how to make sure that these guys are ready to come back. Because when he came back, he was in midseason form. He didn't have any hiccups in his game. He didn't need limited pitches, didn't need limited innings. He just went out there and dominated in that matchup. And, to watch that, it was like, oh, that's postseason Jacob deGrom. I've seen that before. So kudos to the Mets staff for not rushing him back and making sure he got the time he needed to be at the level that he needed to be at, to be that number one for New York. And you mentioned it with the 1-2 punch with Max Scherzer. That's a dangerous rotation moving forward. And Carrasco and Bass have been solid. New York's going to be a very solid baseball team, or at least should be. I don't see where the collapse is. I think a lot of times we're starting to get indicators at this point. Okay, well, this is going to be where the Mets falter. But good pitching and defense can win you a lot of damn baseball games. And they've got great pitching and good defense. They'll win a lot of baseball games. I don't see a scenario where New York completely collapses. Barring injuries, I don't see there being a pin in the balloon, so to speak, that would pop it. This to me looks like a well-rounded baseball team, and you mentioned a statement against Atlanta over the weekend.
Yeah, for sure. And woe is me if I'm Buck Showalter and I got to figure out who to roll the ball out to in game one. If I've got deGrom and Max Scherzer, like, hey guys, come in the room, we're gonna flip a coin, because I can't pick, because Max has got the World Series pedigree. He's a dominator. He's a bulldog, and deGrom is just the filthiest pitcher that's probably ever played the game. With the stuff that he brings to the table, it's just unreal. The conundrum of Buck Showalter deciding which superstar stud ace he's got to roll out for game one, and he gets to come back with the other one for game two of a playoff series.
Let me break out my world's smallest violin for Buck Showalter for having to go through the stress of that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's look ahead here a little bit and talk about preview. And I'm gonna save yours for last, because yours is it's the Field of Dreams game.
Right.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about Soto's return. Washington fans are kind of a weird fan base. They can be very passionate about things. They love a winner. They're very transient here in the DC area. So that hometown feel doesn't necessarily live here within the DC metro area. However, I'm very curious to see how much damage control, because I know they're trying to do damage control, Mike Rizzo and the Learners here in Washington, and say, well, we offered Juan Soto money. We offered him money. You didn't offer him real money. 15 years on a contract that's worth what other guys are getting for 7, 8, 9 years. That's not a real contract, guys. So I'm curious here. I want to see what the reception's like for Soto coming back to Washington. Are fans going to embrace him for what he did here? He helped us win a World Series. You know, I know Max has been welcomed back very warmly. You know, Jordan Zimmerman was welcomed back very warmly when he came back as a member of the Detroit Tigers. So I'm really curious here to see just how this reception is going to go with Juan Soto, because I don't think that Juan wanted to leave Washington necessarily, but Juan wanted to feel like, one, he was wanted here. And I don't think the money that they offered ever got to that place. The total value of the contract, yes, that's a big number, but you're talking 15 years. That contract's not going to be worth the 50th percentile of the most paid players in the league in about 7 years. It's just not going to be there. So I don't think Juan wanted to leave necessarily, but it just wasn't going to work here in Washington. With the ownership being questionable right now, talking about selling possibly that whole situation, and they're just not willing to open the pocketbooks. We've chronicled it. Scherzer's gone, Trey Turner's gone, Bryce Harper's gone. Now Juan Soto's gone. Anthony Rendon's out with the Angels, and he's not been great for the Angels. But Tony Two Bags was an integral part of that World Series championship run that Washington had. They're just letting all these superstars walk out the damn door. It's tired. And I don't blame Juan Soto, and I will welcome him back with open arms to come back here. He won us a World Series. I enjoyed the fuck out of that whole playoff run. And, of course, it paid off with a World Series championship. I'm definitely going to be happy. But I'm not blind to what's going on with ownership. I wonder how the fans are going to receive him back in the stadium, whether or not it's going to be similar. All right, let's talk about your game here. The Field of Dreams game, and it's turning into like a week-long extravaganza, and I love it. I'm here for it. MLB Network's doing a lot of like one-off kind of, bringing the movie and in some of the scenes and doing interviews in the house, and they had some of the iconic views from the movie today. I was watching Harold Reynolds and crew. They were all looking out the window. They were on the swing set that's on the front porch and those sorts of things. It was really, really cool what they're doing. Mm-hmm. What are you looking forward to here with this game and all the festivities around it?
Oh, right now it's the festivities around it. It to me, it's the celebration of baseball in one of the most iconic settings from a movie that instantly paints pictures in your mind if you've ever seen the film. And even if you haven't, some of the scenes. Like you said, the festivities around it have been phenomenal. They put prospects on there the other day, which is just... From a perspective of a prospect, you're not even in the major leagues yet, and you're getting to play on one of the most historic venues that you dreamt of playing on as a kid. When I watched the movie, I have always said to myself, how cool would it have been to step foot on that field and play on that field that was created, and Major League Baseball went ahead and made it happen. They made it a reality. They turned childhood dreams of baseball fans into life. And that is just something that I don't think you can put a price tag on, the emotional value that you get from seeing those scenes play out in real life. It's awesome. It's exciting. It's Christmas Day. And unfortunately, we're getting the presents of underpants and socks for our Christmas present on Christmas Day, because the series itself isn't going to live up to the hype around it. As excited as I am for the second installment in one of the most magical venues in sport, I'm equally disappointed that this game, in terms of final standings, in terms of playoff implication, it is absolutely meaningless. The Cubs, they had their fire sale a year ago. The Reds,
they have a fire sale every week.
We've eviscerated their management so many times, but it deserves another evisceration here on the podcast, because they dismantled their proud franchise at the start of the season, and not for rebuilding purposes. The Cubs was a rebuild.
And then offended their fans in the process.
Rebuilds are an essential part of baseball. They are an unfortunate necessity. because it is a black eye on baseball when fan bases have to endure the misery of 162 games of a rebuild. But from a franchise perspective, they are an unfortunate necessity. Cincinnati didn't have the unfortunate necessity of needing to do a rebuild. They did a rebuild to line the pocketbooks of their ownership, and that's just fucking wrong. And it still enrages me to this day. And I'm a Cardinals fan, and the Reds are in my division. I should be happy, but it's such an eyesore on baseball when you do that. So this matchup features two teams in total rebuild mode. The fan bases for both teams deserve to have at least something go their way, and playing in the nighttime sky in Iowa will give them that chance in the spotlight. So a game in baseball heaven. And even though it features two teams that are not in any sort of race whatsoever, except for maybe the race of who finishes last in the National League Central, even though this features a pitching matchup that would otherwise be ho-hum and doesn't even ring a bell on your radar with Smiley versus Lodello. This is one that you're going to sit down in front of the TV and watch because you want to see the scenes. You want to see the pitchers. You want to feel that energy of the Field of Dreams game. And from a historical perspective, we popped it up on the overlay. They're bringing out the historical uniforms. So you're going to be able to see, the sweet 1908 Chicago Cubs uniforms, the 1913 Cincinnati Reds uniforms, two very proud historic franchises getting to play at that Field of Dreams game. And this has all the potential in the world to become what the NHL has done so well, and that's capitalize on the Winter Classic. Now, what I hope that the Field of Dreams game does that the NHL didn't do is just make it a once-a-year deal. Make this special game a one-time stop so that you don't oversaturate it and you don't overdo it.
Yeah, because the NHL does what, 3 now?
They've got the Stadium Series. They've got the Winter Classic. With all their outdoor venues, it loses the luster of the Winter Classic. And I never want something, especially in baseball.
They did one in like Southern California once.
Yeah,
the ice was terrible.
It was awful. It was watery. It was gross. And I never want. I don't want baseball to lose the magic of something so special.
Right.
And this is a magical night, and it unites baseball fans. I go back to last year, and even though the game was much different in terms of playoff implications and much different in terms of the races and the talent level that was on display, the game in and of itself attracted neutral fans. I had so many people that came up to me because they know I'm a baseball fan, and they go, "That was the most fun I've had watching a baseball game." Watching that game in the cornfield. Baseball's got something here with this Field of Dreams game that I hope they continue to capitalize on it. So the series in itself, the Cubs and the Reds, it's a dud. Like I said, it sucks in underwear at Christmas time, but it is Christmas time, and Christmas time is magical. So enjoy the baseball in baseball heaven.
So here's a question for you, and I'm glad you brought up the comparison of this to the Winter Classic, because we've talked about the fact that they may play a game at Hinchcliffe as well and honor the Negro Leagues,
Sure.
In the future. So they're refurbishing that stadium. It is in the works that MLB plans on playing a game there, much like they do with the Field of Dreams, plus the I forget the name of the game they do in Williamsport as well.
That's the Little League World Series Classic, or
something like I can't remember the name of it, but it's super cool because like the little leaguers get to go out there, hang out with major leaguers and all that. How do you feel about the Winter Classic is supposed to be original 6 teams every single year, and I think they've gotten away from that over the last couple of years. But that was the original. It was only original 6. It was the original sweaters that they wore every time they played, et cetera, et cetera. I like that baseball right now is sticking with really long tradition, kind of original OG type teams. They have the White Sox, and obviously the parallels there with the Black Sox and the Yankees being a franchise that's been around for over a century. You got a couple of teams here with the Cubs and the Reds. You mentioned the uniforms they're wearing from 1908 and 1913. How do you feel about should Major League Baseball focus on keeping it like that, or would you like to see them expand this and let every team in baseball take part in this? Because I'm conflicted personally, because I think that there's some merit to the whole tradition thing and having the OGs play in this game. but I also think that it'd be a great experience for every major leaguer to have an opportunity.
And I think it will get to that point. It's enough right now in the infancy stages, and you have enough baseball history and enough teams that have been really a part of so many, essentially a century of baseball success that you can dive back on and capitalize on. But I think eventually, as they start to progress this more and more and more, we'll see those opportunities open up. But I'm with keeping the historical aspect. First of all, from the historical aspect, I love seeing the historical threads come out.
Yeah.
Seeing some of a baseball in their original uniforms, and you still have the Dodgers, with their roots in Brooklyn, that would come out and be a big part of that series. There's a lot you can do that tells the story of baseball and tells the story of the infancy stages of baseball to bring those teams to light for the Field of Dreams game. But as this moves along, I would certainly hope to open it up to more and more baseball franchises so that their franchise and their fan base can be a part of this and make it special. The ultimate goal, which I don't know if it's a reality, but if you can schedule it to where you can get all of the baseball teams over the course of the next 15 years to get a shot to, whether it's playing at the Negro League Stadium or the Field of Dreams game or the Little League World Series Classic, to get that opportunity for their fan base to be a part of something that's truly unique and truly special. But I'm with keeping the historical franchises in the early stages of this and then opening it up as we move along.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, when they open it up, let's go with the Expos powder blues for the Nats,
yes.
not the old Washington Senators uniforms. No disrespect, Washington Senators. Those Expos powder blues were next level.
Absolutely. And there's so many great uniforms that you can go back on. I want to see the highlight yellow and teal green Oakland A's. I want to see the puke brown of the San Diego Padres to make another appearance. The Milwaukee Braves.
The old Astros uniforms, the rainbow.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
The Nolan Ryan style uniforms.
The Braves with the tulip.
There's so many things that they can do that really ingratiates the historical aspect of their franchise. And like I said, I expect fully that they'll get everybody an opportunity as this moves along over the course, hopefully, of the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. But keeping these, as you mentioned, the OGs to be a part of it in the early stages, I really like that.
Excellent. All right, let's take a quick interlude here. We're going to do our salute to service here, and then we'll get to State of the Union. All right, tonight's episode goes out to Staff Sergeant Diobanjo Senagustin. He died September 4th, 2018, serving during Operation Freedom Sentinel. Staff Sergeant Senagustin was assigned to 1st Stryker Brigade Combat Team, 4th Infantry Division at Fort Carson, Colorado, at the time of his passing. He passed in Afghanistan while serving during said operation. Staff Sergeant Senagustin, we have the watch. All right. So let's talk a little State of the Union here. And I think we're going to get some interesting takes here. A little different approach from each side here. But let's start with yours. And you want to take a look at someone very special to the St. Louis Cardinals fan base.
Absolutely. What a story for Paul DeJong, the shortstop for the St. Louis Cardinals. Came out of spring training. He had a miserable campaign in 2021. He underperformed. There was a lot of question marks. There was an up-and-coming shortstop by the name of Edmundo Sosa, who was really fully in line to take his place. Tommy Edman, certainly with his abilities and everything he can do. And, oh, by the way, the middle of the infield also had another up-and-comer who was playing double A ball at the time, but just hitting moonshots in the name of Nolan Gorman. He had a lot of younger players on his heels, and he was certainly feeling the pressure. But it appeared in spring training that he had erased those demons of 2021. He had a phenomenal spring and earned the job over Sosa, actually sent Nolan Gorman back down to the minors in AAA where he started the season, which is really hard to believe considering some of the numbers he's put up since his call-up. But Nolan Gorman got the start because he had, quite frankly, a miserable spring. And I think maybe made it a little bit about himself and wanted that competition between Nolan and Gorman and between DeYoung and Gorman, knowing that middle infield spot was certainly up for grabs. But DeYoung wins the job, starts off with the regular season, and then out of nowhere just goes right back into a cold snap and couldn't find his swing to save his life. Grounded out into more double plays than I can count in the first 14 games. And all of a sudden, Nolan Gorman gets red hot in Memphis. Left the St. Louis Cardinals ownership with absolutely no choice. They call up Nolan Gorman. Paul DeYoung gets sent down. And for a lot of baseball fans, they've seen this story play out. And you don't see a player come back from that. Yeah. That's generally the end of the road when you get designated for assignment, go back in the minors. It is hard mentally for a player to come back from that, knowing that might have been your last shot to play in the show. But Paul DeYoung continued to stay determined. He had a rough start in the minors, certainly, but then as the season progressed and as he started to find his groove, he found his swing again. And lo and behold, he leaves the St. Louis Cardinals with another situation where they had no choice. So they traded away Edmundo Sosa. They bring up Paul DeYoung back to the major leagues, and Paul DeYoung then gets really hot, red hot for the St. Louis Cardinals. Hits 4 home runs in his first 7 games for St. Louis. He's had clutch at bats. He had another one again tonight. He drove in one on an RBI. So Paul DeYoung has been just been a fantastic story. And for me, you know, the state of the union for Paul DeYoung is just continue to enjoy every single moment that you get here for St. Louis, because he did have such a rocky path, but he's enjoying his baseball. And I think that minor league stint helped him where it doesn't help so many other players. He was able to benefit from that and move forward. So couldn't be more excited for the Paul DeYoung story. Couldn't be more excited for what he's brought to St. Louis. And he's getting hot at the right time because St. Louis went on an upward trajectory over the weekend. As mentioned, they swept the Yankees. The Milwaukee Brewers are in a tailspin. St. Louis is playing playoff baseball with Paul DeYoung in that lineup, and it has been a huge contributor to their success. So not only I'm excited just to see him back in the show, but the fact that he's producing is even like a double added bonus for St. Louis Cardinals fan base. 3 cheers to Paul DeYoung, and the state of the union is strong.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, I'm happy that this happened with, you know, your team, but no matter what team, a guy that gets DFA'd this far into his career, because this isn't a guy that's on a rookie deal who's got a 2-way contract. He's still got 2 or 3 trips to the minors, right? The quote unquote trips that they can go and have to avoid waivers. DeYoung was DFA'd, and that's usually the death knell for veterans. You just don't recover from that. It's so great to see a vet get sent down, put the work in, get back up to the majors, and he's been white hot. So great story for sure. No matter what team you're a fan of. All right, I want to talk about the Yankees, but in a moment, I want to talk a little bit about the Pirates because
there you go.
Stove brought up the Pirates, and we have talked quite a bit about some of the things with the Pirates, both positive and negative, right, this year. Negative being that they left O'Neal Cruz down at the beginning of the season. Positive being that they did bring him up, you know, at a time when they should have brought him up. They're not going to compete this year. They really probably could have left him down, kept another year of team control, but they made the right call, in my opinion, and I think probably in most baseball fans' opinions. Now at the trade deadline, they sold a little bit. They didn't go too crazy getting rid of too much, but I want to get your take a little bit. I think the Pirates are in a good spot here with the young talent that they have. I know that they're historically not a team that wants to pay a lot of people, but I love what they've got there, that foundational talent. They're exciting to watch. There's some exciting players on that team, and O'Neal Cruz just brings like a wow factor, a pop factor. He pops off the screen when you watch him. There's a lot of people speculating he may not play shortstop long term.
Right.
I don't know that I agree necessarily. I understand he's 6'6", 6'7", but Carlos Correa is a big fucking dude, and he plays shortstop at a pretty high level. There's no reason O'Neal Cruz can, as long as he keeps working on his game. And if you're throwing 98 from across the diamond, I'm here for that. And if you're hitting moonshots with exit velocities into triple digits, I'm here for that. What are your thoughts here about the Pirates in terms of their state of the union as we get past the trade deadline, past the All-Star break, and start looking at what next season and beyond looks like for them?
You know, it's my hope for Pittsburgh, for their fan base. It is not my hope as a St. Louis Cardinals fan, but it's my hope that they can put it together quick enough so that they don't fall into what traditionally happens with small market baseball teams, and that's have players get to their full potential only to be used as heavy trade bait for the big contenders. I still think there's a lot of pieces to put together for Pittsburgh. I don't think you mentioned the foundation; it's there, but can some of the other pieces get put in place quick enough to build something to make a run at this? Because you'd want to see it for the Pittsburgh fan base to see O'Neal Cruz, one of the guys they selected, one of their certainly favorites right now, get that opportunity to play postseason baseball for the Buccos. But my biggest concern is, and I've shared this with a lot of other Pirates fans out there, is I think they fall into that small market trap where they bring guys up and at the pinnacle of at the peak of their career, get traded away to a team in contention because the rest of the pieces aren't in place. And from a team standpoint, they're still not in contention to make a playoff push. So you hope to find some success for some of these kids as we move along over the course of maybe the next 1 to 2 years. But if they don't start coming on an upward trajectory in terms of the standings next season, by 2024, they could very well fall in line with those mid-market teams that have to be sellers. An unfortunate part of just the market and the landscape of where baseball is at. That's my biggest concern with Pittsburgh. But you mentioned the foundation is there. They've got some good young talent on the offensive side of the baseball. But can they get the pitching arms in place to be ready? Pitching has been a huge
and it's
kink
so
in the
hard
armor.
to find too.
And it is. And their bullpen. Their bullpen is so ungodly terrible. You get through the starting pitching for Pittsburgh, and you're going to have success if you're even if you're within a bloop and a blast and a grand slam. You're going to be okay with the way Pittsburgh's bullpen is. So my biggest concern with Pittsburgh moving forward is, are they going to fall into that mid-market trap and be a team in 2024 that sells the farm and has to do this all over again?
Isn't that what we saw from you've got the jersey right in front of you for about 15 years, the Royals with guys like Carlos Beltran and several guys that played for that team. It just seemed like they get close and they'd be winning some games, but not enough. And then they got to the point where it was like, well, can we pay this guy and still build the farm system? And the answer was usually no. And then they'd trade away a guy like Beltran, get a nice return. He'd go have tons of success elsewhere. The A's did this quite a bit, despite the fact that with Moneyball, they were able to win games. But, you saw the guys like Damon and Giambi and Zito and Mulder that all left town and had success elsewhere, while Oakland and Kansas City, they just kept saying, okay, well, give us more draft picks, give us more, farm hands, et cetera, et cetera. And then Kansas City, of course, caught lightning in a bottle for 2 years and made a World Series and then won a World Series. But that isn't the easiest thing to do. They hit on a lot of those trades. You look at those rosters from those 2 World Series teams. It was essentially homegrown talent slash homegrown trade bait that got them all that talent, with maybe 2 or 3 pieces added to it. So you're absolutely spot on with the Pirates here. I love the foundation that they've got. I love some of the young guys that they've got, but it is like a 2 or 3 year window that you start to look at and say, within this window, we've got to feel like we can go get 2 pieces and win games, or we've got to make a decision to trade somebody who's still got some team control that's going to get us a big haul back, much like the Nationals just did with Soto.
The reality is, and being this close to the Kansas City market, I can speak really easily on the Kansas City market because I remember the team long before they caught lightning in a bottle. And I have on my scorecard to this date went to a Royals versus at the time Devil Rays game. Remember when they were the old Devil Rays with the
before they dropped the bad word.
Stingray on the jersey.
Absolutely,
they were sexy jerseys. They were a horrible baseball team. We went to the Kansas City and Tampa Bay series, and on my lineup card, still just baffles me that Carlos Beltran, Johnny Damon, and Jermaine Dye all played on the same outfield for Kansas City.
I forgot that Dye was there.
Remember Jermaine Dye?
Oh my God, that
Mike Sweeney anchored first base. It was such a good offensive unit, but Kevin Akers was their starter. Yeah. He was the ace, and he was no ace.
He was a 4 on most rosters.
And that KC team fell apart and ended up selling more than half of the farm. Or not half of the farm, but half of their studs.
Yeah.
And what happened almost a decade later was the same scenario where they put together enough pieces. They weren't the big flashy names by any stretch of the imagination. Eric Hosmer certainly was a huge part of that, and Salvi Perez, but they didn't have the flash. They didn't have the billboard names. It was just a well-structured team that was put together in Ned Yost's system that came together really well. They did have some solid pitching.
They had good pitching.
But so many things for these mid-market teams have to go right. And so often and not, they don't. The stars have to align perfectly to put together a run like the Royals did. It doesn't happen very often. And you go back to I think it was 08 with Colorado, where they made a run at the NLCS. It can
they won
happen.
22 straight down the stretch or something like that.
It was their September roar down the stretch.
Lightning in a bottle, man.
But you don't see it that often from these mid-major teams because it just everything has to align perfectly, and so often and not, the big guys like the Dodgers flex their muscles or flash their cash, and they're taking your guys away. Again, you hope for Pittsburgh that the stars can align, that they can get some solid pitching. I'm not talking go out and get yourself a Cy Young Award winner.
Sure.
I'm talking about anchor your depth, get depth in pitching and try to make a run at this thing. But the odds historically are so against this from working. And I so want this to work not only for Pittsburgh. I'm rooting heavily for Baltimore, even this season, rooting heavily for Baltimore to continue their hot streak. Teams like Seattle, I want to see them get back into the swing of things before they turn into a team that offers so much on trade bait. Happens every now and then that you see a team get put together that you can put on a 2-year to 3-year plan. But if the stars don't go your way, I always say you're one injury away from a mid-major team of being a seller. And I think that's the category that right now I throw Pittsburgh in. My confidence level that they can make a postseason run with the makeup and shakeup of their lineup is pretty low just based on historical evidence.
Yeah, for sure. You're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. And it's hard to win. And I think that's kind of the underlying point of what you just said there. It's hard to win in Major League Baseball. It's really hard to win when you don't have money, you don't have an ownership group that's willing to spend money. Because we've talked about the difference in size of market and stuff like. It's about willingness to go out and spend the money and not cash in 30, 50, 70, 80 million dollars a year in profit. And it's not my money, right? I can sit here and tell you how to spend it, but it's your money to spend. But I'm going to complain about it. But if you have an ownership group that's willing to spend money, because you look at a market like Atlanta or you look at a market like Houston, they're not the top 3, 5, 7 markets, media markets in the country. They're in the top 10 to 12 to 15. But guess who else is in the top 10 to 12 to 15? Baltimore and Oakland, the greater Oakland, San Francisco metro area is one of the bigger. And you look across the bay from Oakland, San Francisco has historically spent money. They had guys like Bonds and Kent. They went out and got pitching. They stole Zito from Oakland and paid him big money. And they've been willing to spend money, and they're in the same media market as Oakland. So it's a combination of catching it at the right time, having the right talent there to build that foundation, but also having an ownership group that's willing to spend a little bit of money. And we just don't see that from Oakland and Pittsburgh and some of these other smaller market teams. But anyway, let's talk about a big market here. And let's talk about the Yankees. Because they are in, as you said with the Brewers, the Yankees are in a tailspin. It's not good. Oof. They have a record that is better than one team in Major League Baseball since the start of August. And that team just sold the biggest superstar that was available on the trade market in Juan Soto. The Washington Nationals are 1-8 in August, and the Yankees are 2-7 in the month of August. It's not good because literally 3-4 weeks ago, we're talking about 116 and whether or not the Yankees were going to be able to get there. That was all the talk, on MLB Network and on ESPN. They're talking about the chase for 116 and yada, yada, yada. And lo and behold, we get past the All-Star break, and some of that Yankees pitching doesn't look quite what they were at about the midway point, the actual physical midway point of the season. We talked about whether or not the Yankees had the best pitching staff in baseball. Nestor Cortez went through a slow stretch there. Jameson Taillon still hasn't recovered from his slow stretch. Garrett Cole went through a funk of about 3 or 4 starts. Recovered last night, had a great outing last night in a series with the Mariners that's been crazy. Nestor pitched pretty well tonight, but the Yankees pitching staff has not been very good over the last about 2.5, 3 weeks, maybe even as much as a month. And it shows in their record over the last month. I mean, they've been a really, I hate to say it, but they've been a bad team if you just look at their record over the last month. And suddenly they're looking up at the Houston Astros in the American League. And that American League East lead doesn't feel quite as safe the way they're playing baseball right now, because they're relying way too heavily on the long ball and good pitching, and the pitching's not there right now. So if you're going to score 2, 3, 4 runs on 3 or 4 solo shots in a game, I don't think that's going to be enough to win games down the stretch here until you figure out the pitching. And they went out and they made a trade at the deadline to try to address some pitching, but I don't know that it was enough. That bullpen looks really susceptible, and we talked about it in the Houston Astros series, that they kind of exposed that Yankees bullpen in a couple of those games in that series right before the All-Star break. Houston got to the bullpen in a couple of those games. So if I'm a Yankees fan, I'm starting to smash the panic button here. And Lord knows that the Yankees fan base and any New York fan base is not at all, averse to hitting that panic button, because that's a very, very trivial, very, very volatile fan base there in New York. I'm hitting that panic button like, hey, are we going to figure this out? Because it's not good. Aaron Judge has hit 45 home runs, but we look like one of the worst baseball teams in the major leagues right now over the course of the last week and a half. It's not good to be in the same conversation with the Washington Nationals, who are in full-on rebuild, like tank rebuild, and you're in the same conversation as them over the last 10 days. Not a good look if you're a Yankees.
Well, you mentioned about their reliance on the long ball, and I think it got them by earlier on in this season when their entire lineup was hitting the long ball. Yeah. Guys like Giancarlo Stanton and Anthony Rizzo,
Donaldson,
and even Urshela to a point. Hitting the long ball in New York right now. It's a one-man show. It's a one-man circus, and it's the Aaron Judge show. And I think that there's a little bit of the New York media that has been diluted from the fact that their baseball team is in a tailspin because Aaron Judge is in the headlines because, Aaron Judge hit another one. Aaron Judge, he's a spectacle right now, and you can't take your eyes off him. And for the life of me, we talked about it before the podcast, pitchers are still throwing to him. You don't know why. He's smashing the ball out of the yard at an incredible rate right now, but the rest of the team, the rest of that offense has to pull their weight. And right now, Aaron Judge is just putting that team on his back, and his back is breaking. And so are the New York Yankees, as you mentioned, in a tailspin. And Houston goes whoop in first place. All of a sudden, all of the hype, all of the talk, we've been highlighting them and praising them over the course of this entire season on this podcast, is starting to unravel in a very New York-like way. But in a New York-like way of what we would expect from the team in orange and blue, not the pinstripes.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm glad you brought that up because we did talk about it a little bit before the show. This is going to be a two-part, so I'm going to ask my first part, and then we're gonna discuss the second part as well because it's a really interesting conversation. I think, my personal opinion. First part is you mentioned nobody else is hitting. How much of that is the result of is that a big reason why they're pitching to Judge because he's constantly at the plate with nobody on base? I think the dude's got 45 home runs, and I believe like 25 of them are solo shots this year. Is that why he keeps getting pitched to?
That's probably a good reason on why they're pitching. It's not the reason that I would pitch to him. And I don't know if I'm gonna stumble onto the second part of your conversation or not. But with the rest of their offense in a tailspin, with the rest of their offense dragging so far behind, if I'm on the mound, I'm throwing you 4 wide ones. Or actually, in today's game, I'm telling the bullpen.
I'm just going to tell him. Put him on.
Get that free pass because the rest of the offense isn't pulling their weight. So I'm not scared from the pitching standpoint to go after the rest of that batting lineup and the lineup behind him. But I guess you could make a point. The argument could be made that because there's nobody on, that you can go ahead and throw to Judge. But he's proven time and time again historically that that's just a really bad fucking idea.
I think it's just the analytics thing, right? Like pitching to somebody without anybody on base who's going to hit a solo shot is better than pitching to anybody else that might hit a 2-run home run. I just think the game has gotten so centered in a lot of ways. We just talked about how the Mets play a different brand of baseball, but most teams in today's game, it's so centered on these it's a triary outcome. It's a strikeout, a home run, or a walk, essentially in these at bats from both the pitcher and the batter's perspective. That I think maybe they pitch to him because a solo shot to Aaron Judge is better than facing the guy behind him who might, hit that 100-mile-an-hour fastball just enough to get it out. I'm not sure. My second part is I want to go back to what we talked about before the show. Put a guy like Barry Bonds in this situation where pitchers, Aaron Judge gets 6 to 12 pitches a game that are hittable pitches, right? And by hittable, I mean in the zone, in a count that he's willing to swing, in a count that he's willing to attack the ball. He gets like 6 to 12 pitches a game to hit. Barry Bonds during his peak used to get 6 to 12 pitches a month to hit. And I said it before the show, one pitch like a series, essentially. And you look over the course of a month, he might get a dozen pitches to hit over the course of an entire month. McGwire was very similar during the summer of '98, as was Sosa. Guys didn't want to pitch to him. They were chasing Roger, but they didn't, they didn't want to give up the big fly. They didn't want to be the guy that gave up 62. Could you imagine how many home runs Mark McGwire or Sammy Sosa or Barry Bonds would hit if they were facing the pitching that they're facing now, we'll go on the low end and say getting a half dozen pitches a game to hit? How many balls do you think Barry hits into McCovey Cove over the course of a season if he's getting a half dozen pitches a game?
These historical things are always tough for me to connect the dots because of the way that pitching in general has changed, the velocity that they're throwing, the heat that they're bringing. Certainly you did not see that out of the starting rotations in the late 90s. Right. So, but to your point, Barry Bonds was famous for getting walked with the bases loaded. That's how much they didn't want to pitch to them. That's how very few pitches they saw. I remember very vividly the summer of '98 and all the times that I was screaming at the television because they would walk Mark McGwire, pitch the ball to him. To the point where they're chasing wide pitches, intentionally walk pitches, and still hitting them over the fence. Yeah. That's what they were doing in that magical summer. And then what Bonds did several years later when he not only chased Roger down, but chased Mark down. If they're getting pitched to the capacity that Aaron Judge is getting pitched to in today's game, the number's not 70. The number's flirting with mid-upper 80s and even 90s for a potential number. I'm astounded at this point in the season how much they're still pitching to Aaron Judge.
Crazy.
I don't understand it from a management standpoint. I don't understand it. If I'm the opposing manager, I want no piece of this lineup because, again, he's proven time and time again that he's going to take you deep regardless of where the pitch is. He's seeing 85%. I think he was watching a game on Yes the other day, and they were showing the percentages of pitches that they're throwing, and it's lowing away outside sliders, just trying to throw him junk, not intentionally walking him, but in essence, essentially is intentionally walking him, and he's knocking the outside sliders down the right field line. That's what he's been able to do. So for God's sakes, give him 4 wide ones. But they haven't. And to your point, if Bonds, if McGuire, if Sosa, if the heavy hitters back in the late 90s are getting pitched to the frequency that Aaron Judge is getting pitched to, the number is a hell of a lot higher than 70.
It's almost disrespectful, but it is what it is. All right, let's talk a little fair or foul here. All right. Let's start here with a series that we highlighted and reviewed here, a team we've talked about a little bit. Fair or foul, Ty, the Mets were right to stand pat at the deadline. And I want to put a disclaimer out there before anybody says, well, they made some trades. Yeah, they traded for and also ran for the Pirates, who has kind of a one-trick pony, and then a utility outfielder. They didn't make any sort of splash at the deadline. So that's why we say they stood pat. First place team didn't go out and make themselves demonstrably better on paper. Were they right to do that?
It's like when you put your car in neutral and it moves just a tiny bit. That's what they did at the trade deadline. Right now, here's the deal. I can tell that this is a foul ball in my personal opinion, because I wanted to see them make more of a splash. I wanted to see them say, hey, we've got a team in first place. Not only do we have a team that we want to keep in first place, we also have a team that we want to chase down the rest of the pack in the National League. So we need to go out there and get some more players. We need to go out there and get some more bats. But here's the deal. Results speak for themselves. And right now, to me, they have the offensive pieces in place. You mentioned it's not flashy. It's not long ball, other than maybe Pete Alonso and Francisco Lindor and a couple of the other hitters. But it's guys that go up there and pay their bills. It's guys that are putting the ball in play, getting singles, moving the runners over, getting them home on sacrifice flies, getting runs, and then having that extremely dominant pitching staff go out and do the rest of the work. And you look at the big splash, their splash would have had to have been on the offensive side, because I'm not touching that pitching staff. I'm not touching the bullpen. I'm not touching the closer. I think from the arms race perspective, the arms and throwing arms race, not the arsenal that San Diego was able to add. From the arms race perspective, they're set. They're solid. There was no need to go out there and make a splash for another arm. I would have loved to see another bat. Maybe an additional help out in the outfield. Maybe get a player that could have been a potential weaponized designated hitter for them as they move forward. They didn't do that. I don't think it hurts them now in terms of getting in the postseason, but I think it hurts them in terms of how far they can go in the postseason for standing pat. So I'm saying foul. The Mets were wrong here to stand pat.
Goddamn, we are 100% on the same page. Because I also think that they took into consideration that they were going to get DeGrom back. I think they knew probably better than they were letting on just where he was in terms of his rehab, and they were expecting to get him back. So, no, there's no need to go get an arm. I didn't expect them to get an arm. I expected him to get a bat. Bullpen, no. I want to talk about Edwin Diaz in just a minute. We're going to make an aside here on Edwin Diaz in just a moment. But I'm with you 100%. I think in October – I don't think Vogelback's going to make enough of a difference for them in terms of being able to put him in at the DH and maybe spell Alonso. You're not spelling Alonso at first base in the playoffs. So essentially you're looking at Vogelback. Is he our DH solution against both righties and lefties? Do we have a counter to lefties in terms of a batter that we can put in at DH? we've talked about weaponizing that DH position, and the Mets aren't doing it. I would have liked to see, if I'm a Mets fan, I really would have liked to see them go get a bat, get a bopper in that lineup that's going to make our lineup longer, that's going to complement Alonso, that's going to complement what Lindor is doing, that's going to cash in on these runs. We've talked about it, all these contact hitters that are putting the ball in play, getting on base, causing some commotion on the base paths. Give me another bat in that lineup that can cash in those runs when there's ducks on the pond. So I'm with you. This is foul for me looking ahead to October, because I don't think that in the heat of October that they're going to have enough hitting to stick with the likes of even the Braves. I think the Braves are going to get healthy here and really be a problem in October. But you look at the Cardinals are hot right now. If the Dodgers continue to play the way they're playing, and if the Padres figure it out, I know that's a big if with the Padres, but I just don't think the Mets are going to have the firepower to stick up. Before we transition to our next topic, I want to ask you, because this has been a hot topic right now, and the Mets are doing this maybe better than anybody in baseball right now, the intro music. Have you seen Edwin Diaz's intro?
Full disclaimer, I have not.
Okay.
Full disclaimer, I have not.
So I'm gonna pose this without Edwin Diaz being part of the question. What is the best closer entrance that you can recall? Because there's some iconic ones that my brother was the first one to ask me this question, and he heard that other people were saying Edwin Diaz has the best one of all time. That's foul. That's as foul as foul gets, because there are some big time guys that have had some awesome. Edwin Diaz's intro is great.
I remember the most vivid one comes from a Hall of Famer, of course, and it comes from just watching them postseason after postseason after postseason. But when you hear the bass kick on Inner Sandman, when that comes in, and you got Mo coming to the mound, and Inner Sandman's blasting, and the crowd is going nuts, and you can hear literally the bleachers underneath their feet just going with the kick of the bass to Inner Sandman.
Just electrifies the air.
That one, to me, I mean, from an offensive standpoint, that's got to send chills through your spine. I don't know how you get in the batter's box when you're bearing witness to Inner Sandman and Mo coming out of the bullpen and taking the mound. The other one that I really love is actually completely un-Major League Baseball related, but Wild Thing with Major League. There's nothing better than Ricky Vaughn coming out to Wild Thing.
Brought that up. That's so good. God, that's so amazing. Yeah, for sure. I love Edwin, and he comes out to like Matador trumpets essentially. I guess it's fantastic. It's awesome, and they've got it like choreographed where like there's an intro kind of thing, and apparently it's something from like the show Narcos. There's like a speech, and then he hits the outfield grass, and it kicks into the Matador trumpet music. It's really cool. I like it. It's not the best of all time. I can name about 3. Mo was one for sure. The other one I really liked was Papelbon coming out to Dropkick Murphys. That was always fun.
Yes.
I liked Rocker sprinting from the bullpen, dead sprint to the mound, although John Rocker he went off his rocker pretty early in his career. But my favorite of all time, and I watched both Mo Papelbon and this one gave me chills. And it reminded me of being back in high school and in college and watching these games, and the feeling I used to get when Trevor Hoffman would come out of the bullpen to Hell's Bells. When the bells just strike, I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it. I'm not kidding you. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. It's such an iconic, the bell hits and you're like, oh, fuck. Trevor Hoffman's coming in. I know he's going to throw me a changeup, and I know I'm not going to be able to hit it.
Absolutely.
That's my favorite of all time.
I totally forgot about Hell's Bells. I love Papelbon's Dropkick Murphys. They're all good. And to put one in perspective on greatest of all time, the only reason I say greatest intro of all time is just because of the vivid images and memories you get from the towels and the entire stadium rocking. That's the one that sticks out at me. But I love good theater, and entrance music provides great theater. You talk about batter walk-up songs. This is a completely unrelated topic, but you go back to Coors Field. Charlie Blackmon enters to the 1980s classic Your Love by the outfield. After the song cuts off, you can hear in every Rockies game, the rest of the fan base is still singing the song. It's so cool, and it raises the hair on your arms to hear that many people in unison. It's not only supporting the player, but the love of great music. It adds an element of theater to baseball. And nothing's better than a good intro.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. All right, let's move on to our next topic here. And we talked a little bit about the Padres acquiring Josh Hader. Fair or foul? Milwaukee is the new quote-unquote cursed team. Are we going to hear about the Hader curse in 80 years when the Brewers haven't made the World Series in 80 years? Because they traded him away, and recent reports are indicating that it was out of the blue. We were surprised. I know it caught me off guard. You said, whoa, in the group chat about it.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently it's over the fact that he's going to make $15 million next year. Is this going to create a Hader curse? Fair or foul?
I'm going to say, God dang it. I want to say what I want to say, and I want to say fair because I don't want Milwaukee to win another baseball game because this ownership is just so back-asswards. This is $15 million. Now, again, you and I talking about $15 million is completely different than Major League Baseball ownership.
I don't have $15 million that I'm going to give to somebody else.
But if we're talking from like person to person, to put this in perspective, in layman's terms, you would take away the million mark, and it would be like over essentially $15, over something that well, not this week because this week was rent and utilities and everything else. Normally, I could pull out my wallet and give you $15. Right. That's what MLB owners, that's what franchises are able to do. $15 million is a penny in the ocean in comparison. And so to trade a guy away over $15 million next year, it doesn't make any sense. My hope is this. And here's a scenario that has played out a couple times in my head. Milwaukee misses out on the playoffs this year. There's a one single indicating factor in terms of why they missed out on the playoffs this year. And the management.
Blow a save on the last day of the season.
Wouldn't that be something? To St. Louis, of all teams. But this is seriously, we are treading on territory where general managers lose their fucking jobs over. And I could see management from Milwaukee, them cleaning house in the front office because of this back-asswards decision to trade a guy away. It's fair. They are, if results hold, the new cursed team in baseball because of the Hader trade over $15 million. It's a selfish move. If the rumors are true, it's an absolutely mind-boggling move from management to do that over 15 mil. I'm going to go fair here.
Yeah, I'm going to go fair, and I'm going to double down and say I hope that it's true and they're cursed and this is their GOAT, this is their babe, this is their their Bobby Mitchell, for other sports to bring in here. Curses aren't just in baseball. This is, all sports have these things. I hope that this is, because the more I see of this being about $15 million, I didn't understand the move to begin with. I thought they were going to make a move and put a guy in that position that's like their next big closer. But all they did was move their setup guy into the closer role. That's not the move you make if you're a playoff team, if you're trying to get into the playoffs. So for me, this is fair. And I hope, I'm doubling down that I hope they go through a long spell of not having any success because of this fucking move. It's so silly.
Personal promise that I can make to you on this podcast, if we have future podcasts for 2023 and beyond, which I hope we do for RosinBaggers, if the Milwaukee Brewers miss out on the postseason, I will personally buy a Brewers customized jersey with the number 15 on the back and million for the nameplate.
Yeah.
And I will go to Milwaukee next year to a baseball game and wear that jersey to show that fan base. That is my personal promise to you.
I am here for all of that.
Dude, I'm savage as fuck when it comes to the Central.
I love it. All right, let's finish up with, we mentioned the Yankees previously chasing 116. So here's a question for you. The Dodgers have won their last 9. They're like 15-2 over the last 17. They're the hottest team in baseball over the last 3, 4, 5 weeks. Are the Dodgers now on 116 watch? Because right now they are on pace. If they only held pace, they are on pace for 113 wins. And that includes us talking about the fact that they looked like they were just kind of in cruise control for the first half of this season. They've turned it on lately. Are they going to go 41-13 down the stretch and get to 116? Are they going to go better than 41-13 and break 116? How do you feel about this?
Dodgers down 116 watch. We have put so far on this podcast 2 teams on 116 watch. One was the Los Angeles Dodgers, but then we took them off 116 watch and replaced them with the New York Yankees, and now we're taking the New York Yankees off 116 watch. I'm going to say this is foul to put the Dodgers on 116 watch. And I'm going to go back to just a recent example from my own very St. Louis Cardinals, who just got off the emotional sweep over the New York Yankees, turned around and laid an egg against, of all teams, Colorado Rockies. So you can take a look at their remaining schedule and you can be like, well, looks like cake. You got the Twins, you got the Royals, you got the Brew Crew for 4 games. You turn around, you play the Marlins, and you got the Brew Crew and the Marlins again, and you don't have a legitimate series for the Dodgers against a contender until you get down to the bottom of August here, where they'll play up against the New York Mets. Well, then you turn around and you play the Padres again. You play the Giants again. You play the Padres again. And you close out the season with the Cardinals and the Padres before finally finishing with the Colorado Rockies. September is a extremely, extremely tough month for the Los Angeles Dodgers. They're going to have to play some damn good baseball. And they're going to be playing teams, quite frankly, here's the other side. With all those series with the Padres, with that series against the Cardinals, those are going to be teams that are revving up in 5th gear, that are already going to be playing playoff baseball because they are going to be in the heat of playoff races, where the Dodgers can look up and say 16 and a half games, we're kicking our feet up. I don't see them going 20s at 24, 25 games over 500 to reach that 116 plateau. It's going to be awfully tough for LA. I don't see 116 happening this year, despite the fact that we had 3 really good shots at it. I see this one foul. And over 100, sure. 105, maybe. 116, no way in hell.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, right? And I think I agree for the exact same reasons. We're going to get to September, and Dave's going to look at the standings and say, oh, we're 15 games up on the Padres. We don't need to stretch out Tony Gonsolin today. We don't need to play Mookie Betts today because he's played the last 3 days in a row. We don't need Freddie Freeman to play his 38th game in a row. We're going to give these guys a little bit of a break. We're going to take our foot off the pedal a little bit because we can. And then maybe when we get down to the stretch run of September, we'll start to ramp back up for the playoffs. This is also a team that has a lot of playoff experience. So Dave has to feel like, even if I take my foot off the pedal right up until the last minute, this team can turn it on when the playoffs come around because they've won a World Series. They brought in Freddie Freeman, who just won a World Series. So you're looking at a team that has to feel like we can turn it on at any time. And that was what we talked about 3-4 weeks ago, is like, are the Dodgers just kind of going through the motions? We might start to see some of that as we get closer to September here as well. It's fun to watch right now because they're just winning every game they play and blowing people out. It's crazy. They've got, like I mentioned, since like June 23rd, they've outscored their opponents by more than double of what their opponents have scored. It's crazy what they're doing right now. But yeah, I'm with you. This is foul. I think they push 110. I think they get to 107, maybe 108. I don't think they get into the teens. I think 116 is safe this year. This is foul for me, for sure. All right, I'm going to open the floor here. Closing comments, Ty. What you got for me, bud?
Gosh, best moment in baseball. It didn't even happen in Major League Baseball. It happened earlier this week at a Little League World Series game. You might have seen the highlight. Texas and Oklahoma playing in their regional competition to try to get to Williamsport. And lo and behold, what we've seen way too much of in Major League Baseball, we're starting to see a lot in Little League Baseball, and that's just pitchers that can't control the high inside heater. And player gets hit in the head. It looked like an awfully scary moment.
It looked
Luckily,
like it got under the visor.
Yeah,
That
it was
the scary part.
very close, and it was really scary to see. But thank God the caption had watched till the end, because I'm like, why did you just share a video of a little kid getting plunked in the head and potentially life-threatening injury? He gets up, he's okay. He walks over to first base. Something that we haven't seen at any level in whether it's baseball or society is humanity. And here is the player that just got hit in the head by a high-pitched fastball. He didn't get upset about it. He didn't throw his bat. He didn't throw his gloves. He didn't get aggressive, and instead shared compassion with his pitcher, who was clearly rattled by the events that had taken place. He had no intention of doing that to another human being, and he goes over to the mound and gives him a hug. A special moment, and kids are still teaching us lessons as kids that we can take in our adult lives and bring forth, and that is humanity and compassion. So hats off and kudos to Little League Baseball, which, just as it's done every year when I watch Little League World Series Baseball, it teaches us lessons that we can take into our adult lives.
I'm going to double down on that, because I've seen the news and I've seen the clip and I've seen the consoling on the mound. Just 24 hours prior, Oklahoma was playing the team from Mississippi, and they came back in the bottom of the 6th inning and won that game. And the entire team, after celebrating together for just moments, walked over without being prompted by their coaches, walked over and consoled the Mississippi team. They were shaking hands, hugging those players. Listen, I'm going to tip my cap to those coaches. I'm going to tip my cap to those parents, and I'm going to tip my cap to everybody that's involved in that Oklahoma Little League, because you're doing things right. You're teaching those kids lessons that are going to, as you put it, take them into adulthood with skills that many adults these days don't have. And those are skills that we need a lot more